Hi, everyone, and welcome back for our last NASE Calgary webinar of the year. I'm your host, Brett Johnson, Program Chair for NASE Calgary. So I don't know about anyone else, but this holiday season sure snuck up out of nowhere. I know this has been an exhausting year for everyone. We've had a number of challenges to overcome, including the constant lockdowns, frequent changes in COVID protocols, fears of getting sick, and of course, the added stress of how family, friends, and colleagues are all navigating this pandemic. I hope everyone can spend some quality time this holiday break, resting and healing. So your NASE Calgary executive, led by Eric Wilmer, has had to deal with a constant changing landscape while trying to provide the best services they can to our membership with what limitations we have. So to all of our membership and all our sponsors out there, we really thank you for continued participation and support with us during this time. So today, I have the great privilege to welcome Monica Hernandez and Sandy Williamson to our webinar platform. So Monica served over 20 years in the oil and gas industry before becoming an entrepreneur with her own professional project. She supports companies managing the day-to-day operations of aging facilities and ensuring compliance to regulations. And Sandy has a combined 41 years of experience in the industry with both operations and consulting, including his own long entrepreneur journey as president of Ammonite Corrosion Engineering. Also, as the former president of NASE International, Sandy has volunteered decades of service to NASE, including conference executive committees, course instruction, and providing technical direction. So his newest adventures in retirement includes stewarding the role of material sustainability. So thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you guys both join in today.
Thank you also to the NASE Calgary section for having us. This is a great opportunity, and I really know how you guys try hard to, get these opportunities going around and making a lot of participants and then growing knowledge and all that. So I'm very appreciative of the time you're giving us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both. So what are you guys going to talk about today with us?
We're going to talk about the cost of corrosion. And we want to introduce you, and I'm hoping a lot of you have already read or know that at least this report exists. We finalized the Canada Impact Study, which is a long name for how much do we spend in corrosion in Canada. So we'll have some examples. We'll talk about exciting, what is new, and what we're pioneers on doing, because we have never done sustainability in such studies in the world. So Sandy is here to share with you that excitement. And I hope you guys enjoy what we have. And I hope this brings a lot of thoughts and a lot of, questions on how we can do better and how we can use this information for the best in our own personal and professional environments.
Oh, that's awesome. So this report, is it available now for people to look at if they're interested?
Absolutely. It is available. It is available through the AMPP website. There's been articles written about it. The MP magazine just released the December the December edition, and then they feature case that the study. There has been other magazines around the world, and if you don't have any of that, contact me and I'm gonna send with pleasure one of the copies.
That's awesome. So before we get into that presentation there, I want to take a moment and highlight some of our annual sponsors. Their contributions allow us to provide webinars like this one and other ones to all of our membership at no charge. So today, I would like to highlight one of our gold sponsors, Brenntag. So Brenntag is a global market leader for chemical and ingredient distributions. They have been servicing the Canadian oil industry for over 65 years with gas processing and specialty production chemicals. They have a strong team of chemists to provide comprehensive lab and analytical services right here in Calgary. They also can help operators solve internal pipeline corrosion issues with their risk assessment modeling, which includes pipeline connectivity and flow apportionment using GIS data to optimize corrosion inhibition programs. And of course, to all of our other annual sponsors are a huge reason why we can do what we do. Our sponsors help fund several initiatives that NASE Calgary takes on to promote the knowledge of corrosion, sustainability, and asset integrity to our industry and to the next generation of engineers. To each one of our sponsors, thank you again for your continued support. So if you haven't had the chance yet to check out our YouTube channel, please go to our website at nasecalgary.ca, where you can find the direct link to our channel. So on the channel, you'll find the nice tailored up recordings from these webinars, which are all touched up and modified, to make it look like I run a nice flawless show here without any hiccups whatsoever. So Monica here will be giving our presentation live, and Sandy, of course, as well. So be sure to stick around after the presentation, and we'll then move into a live Q&A session. So please submit your questions to us using your Zoom client by clicking that Q&A button there at the bottom of the screen. If you're joining us from YouTube Live, please enter your comments, your questions into the comment fields in there, and then I'll be sure to ask them. So with all that, Monica, share your screen and take it away.
So this is what we're going to talk about. So impact study, and this is only for Canada. We did this kind of same exercise some years ago at a global level, and then we did one for India, and then now Canada is presenting its own results. So what we're going to do is, what we're going to see is, we're going to talk a little bit about this study. I'll give you some results, and then we'll talk about the case studies. We all like to see how this relates to, real life. So what does that mean in real life? We'll have our own chapter of sustainability. And then Sandy is gonna really talk about all the sustainability section, and then the next steps. So what is this going to hopefully help us get in? What is those questions that we want to pop in your mind after? So without delay, let's start. We're gonna do some acknowledgements. So the key sponsors for this study were I'm gonna say it without the acronym, because acronyms, we live in a world of acronyms and it differs from one person to another, one company to another. So it's the Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and then the NASE International Northern Area. Those were the two biggest sponsors for this one. So what we're gonna see today is the results of their efforts. I had the privilege to be the country manager for the study from the beginning, and we are doing right now the communication section of it. So it's the next phase of the project. So really things like this, webinars, talking to people, getting to know the study, getting you guys involved, and how this is going to help hopefully make your life easier when you're presenting something to the managers. We did have a technical advisory panel. Sandy was a big portion of that. We had Pierre Crevolin, Nafis Ibrahimi, Rob Phillips, Jack White, Denise Segday, and Elaine. So those were the panels of people, and then people that were around during the whole study until we publish it. Some of them still are part of the panel that works in the distribution section. So the second step in the project. So participants and how we did that. And we are not going to spend a lot of time in here. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on how this was done and how did we came up with some results. I know that some people ask questions about how did you come up with something, and then really detailed questions about the numbers and how is that a 0.53 instead of 0.57. And then unfortunately, we won't have time to go into that much detail, but if you guys go and dive into the study, I'm sure you can have a lot of more clarity. And then if you still have questions, you can always reach out. So basically, we did the study with 4 industry sectors: energy, that included offshore, onshore, midstream, upstream. That was kind of that area: manufacturing, mining, and transportation. we sent around 200 roughly studies to different levels of organizations. So people from very technical backgrounds, people from the leadership background, managerial background, and even some companies participated in a group level instead of an individual level. What that meant is that some companies actually decided to go about and do a group exercise. So some people were in charge of answering some questions in some of the portions of the questionnaire, and then some others were in charge of a different section. There were 87 questions, self-assessment, and then they were answered electronically. So what and how did we come up with these domains, or how did we know which domains we wanted to check? So basically there are 10 domains. And when I said some minutes ago that we were looking at, for the first time, we were doing some stuff that has never done before, I meant the sustainability portion. So this is the first study. It's the first time that a study, not the global, not the India, not any other study has ever looked at sustainability, just this one time. And it was a standalone portion on the project. So it is a huge, it's a huge deal that we are looking at that particular area right now. Other than that, we looked at policy, stakeholder, organization, accountability, resources, communication, corrosion management practice integration, continuous improvement, and performance measures. So KPIs basically. And along those 10 domains, we evaluated all the life cycle of the asset, from the design to the abandonment. So we looked at, for example, the policy, and then we looked at the policy then in the design phase, in the manufacturing and construction, operations, abandonment. So all of those areas, and then like that for all of the 10 domains. So I brought you some sample questions. Those sample questions, or the whole questionnaire, is included in the study at the very end. So if you look at the study and you're curious about what question 2.8 is, then you can look at it. So for example, does your organization have a corrosion management policy? And everyone is like, yeah. Well, yeah, is that throughout the life cycle of the asset? Or does it include anything about operation? Does it include anything about abandonment? And then, is that only for this plant, or is that for the organization itself? So it's a little bit of thinking that you have to do when you're answering questions like that. Another example I have here is, are corrosion management procedures and tools aligned to and embedded into other disciplines? For example, safety, environment, risks, maintenance, integrity. Maybe they are, but they are not at that level. Maybe reliability knows what that means. Maybe integrity knows what that means. But someone in safety and health and safety department, they will be like, what? What do we have corrosion engineers in this plant? Really? So this is kind of the questions that we asked, and then that's how the process worked. So this is it. How much corrosion costs in Canada? $52 billion, US dollars. That's like 63 billion Canadians, roughly. What is very impacting to see, and what I want you to retain, is that this number has increased around 20%, 21% to be exact, from the 2009 study. And then you can argue, yeah, but we have more infrastructure and we have more ways to measure and then report. And then yes, but we also have more development in technology. We have more tools for inspection. We have brilliant people going and do a bunch of different PhDs and corrosionists, and so we have the tools, we have the people, we have and still we are having lots of problems, and we are spending lots of money on corrosion. that number equates roughly to 3% of the GDP, Canada's GDP. So it's a huge number. Now, what will you say if I tell you that it's been discussed, analyzed, proved that if we don't invent anything more, we just use what we have right now, the technology we have right now, the people we have right now, the tools we have right now, we can save between 15 and 35% of that number. That's a huge number. So it's like 17 to, 18 billion, just using what we have right now. So it's something to think about. So one question will be, how do we compare ourselves to other countries? How do we compare ourselves to the global? So roughly, in other words, we are not better or worse. We are just in ballpark the same. If we compare ourselves to the US with all the people they have, and they arrived to 2.7, so we are roughly the same, but we have less people. We pride ourselves to be more conscious. We pride ourselves to do better jobs and do things in a little bit of a better way. So that's kind of in the scale what we are at. So the question that comes up is, if we use the technology, the tools, the people, we use what we have right now, then, and we are not doing it, then what is the missing part? What is that missing part of the puzzle that will make us get better at what we are doing? And then we ended up with this needed to be a cultural change. Just like health and safety was one time, not really, people were operating not in a really very safe way, and then just climbed into pipe racks without even having a harness. And Sandy is laughing because, yeah, I know that we have seen it before. And then it became cultural. It became that you come home and then you put in your Christmas tree, and then you all of a sudden just checking if the ladder has the locks on, and then you have the 3-point and all that, right? So it becomes cultural. So we are hoping that this is giving us tools for this to become cultural and to become part of the organization's culture. That this is important, and it is important because it's not only money, but it's also what can we save for the environment, for the people, be more safe, and then ultimately, obviously, get some savings in the back. I don't know if you guys remember, but around 2011, the Cobb refinery in Regina, they had one very serious incident. And it was all related to corrosion. So just to say that we haven't had incidents is not really true. We did, and we do, and we continue to have them. And we are in this 2021 ending year, but we still are, hurting the environment, hurting people, and then losing a lot of money. And then some of that is related to corrosion. Can it be prevented? I'm going to show you some case studies for that. So remember the 10 domains I showed you some minutes ago? So this is how we do good. We do good in continuous improvement. So we like to improve, we like to do better. We ask ourselves, we give feedback, that's good. Corrosion management practice integration, we seem to be good as a Canadian culture on this one. And then organization. Where is there a lot of room for improvement is in the policy, performance measures, and then stakeholder integration. And specifically, this one in the stakeholder integration in the manufacturing and abandonment phases. What does that mean is, for example, do your contractors really know the importance of what you're doing? And if they don't commit to this culture or these engagements in corrosion, and what can happen, and what is the outcome of that? So this is basically, in a nutshell, the strengths versus what is the room for improvement in Canadian companies. So boom, case studies. So this is real case studies. They were written and then shared within the study. In a nutshell, I'm going to present to you three of them. Sandy will present another one, and then we'll dive into the sustainability portion. So this one first study, and pardon me, I'm just going to go back a little bit. When we say corrosion and then corrosion management, a lot of people think on, the refineries or the midstream, the upstream, the chemical plants. And we don't think that this can affect very well a lot of infrastructure. And we know that there are other countries that have a little bit more control, and then they have procedures and things in place that will help. For example, the municipalities, when they build bridges or they build overpasses and things like that, they will help on making those decisions with a mindset of long term. So this one, it's a great one. It's from the city of Calgary. It happened in 2014. They had a really big failure, released many liters of water, impacted around 100,000 citizens, flooded many of the roads and houses and things like that. And so when they investigated, they looked at the failure, the soils are really are more rich in sulfate than it was anticipated. So obviously it goes into the structure, and then it corrodes the steel part of the mortar. So okay, the rupture happened. They had to deal with the consequences. So what they did did a risk study. They started to do soil studies, and then they started to understand that what caused it, what can be the benefits of doing some more like samples in other areas. And then bam, they got hit again in 2013 with another rupture. So they started using what is called electromagnetic NDE, and then they find anomalies before it happens. So they went to see how they went from very reactive to a proactive. And then they went and say, okay, we had that big failure, and they just not sit down and wait for the next failure to happen. They said, okay, let's see what are the risks and what are the areas that we are more prone to have that type of failure. They kind of prioritize that, and then they said, okay, let's do the risk assessment. We'll do those areas, and then if we need to dig, we're gonna dig, and then we're gonna make repairs before anything happens. That resulted in significant reduction of, obviously, unplanned repairs. They can plan now for repairs. They don't have affected people. They don't have complaints, and obviously they are not affecting 100,000 citizens for a thing that could have been prevented. So that was a good one. The second one, and that's also in a municipality, is the city of Vancouver. Many bridges, many constructed in the 50s, some of them in the 30s, lots of them actually in the 30s. And and this one particularly, I like it a lot, because what they are doing right now, it's evolved from what they have done after the 2016 impact study, and someone read it and someone said, okay, this makes sense. This makes sense to have, to have people and to have things looked at. So let's do this in this way. One thing that I like about it is that before they started doing the program, the contractors were going and coat over coat over coat of paint, and that wasn't really the solution. So what they found is that if they do the assessment, they train people, and they make people understand what the the importance of what they are doing is going to have, then they get better results. And that's exactly what they did. They train people, they changed the manuals, they changed the procedures, and now they are operating in a way that is helping them have that. Another thing that is very important in that one is that their program includes people in everything, like health and safety, QA/QC, contractors, and everything. So it is really good example of integration. Case study 3, and that is going to be Sandy. Sandy presented this paper already, so it's a presentation. It's a public paper that is available there. The reference is on the top here. So I'm gonna turn it on to Sandy, and then as Sandy is done with this last case study, then he'll dive into sustainability, and I'll come back a little later to talk about the wrap up.
Thank you, Monica. So yeah, this last case study was a really interesting one because as we are trying to show here, it basically highlighted that if something was done back in the design phase, we could have saved the cost, a lot of costs down the road. And essentially, without getting into too much detail, as Monica mentioned, it is a public domain paper. What was decided during the design phase was to not put a gas blanket on the boiler feed water storage tank. And they felt that, the design team felt that this has always been done this way. We won't get any oxygen ingress into the boiler feed water. But long story short, they started having lots of failures in the preheat exchange leading up to the big steam generators that you have typically in these big SAGD facilities. And finally, after they'd had quite a few failures, and we had basically done an audit at the time of their facilities and said, why aren't you doing something to remove oxygen? Finally, 2 and 2 added up to getting us back in and establishing that we needed to have oxygen control. Okay, so that was kind of the technical side of it, but what we've tried to emphasize in the paper was more the cost side. And as you can see at the bottom, the actual cost of repair and losses from production or lost production due to failures was around $80 million. And if we went back with the company and we figured out what would it have cost us if we had designed and implemented proper mitigation, simply a gas blanket on a tank from day one, it would have been about, $200K to prevent that. But basically it's ended up showing to the client that by doing something very simple back in day one, they could have, over the life of the project or up until this point, they would have saved 17 million. And of course, the savings are ongoing because now they're controlling oxygen, they're getting better life out of their heat exchangers and so on. So I think it's a good example where we have a technical solution, but what we did is we tried to understand better the economics behind it. And when management saw that, they said, okay, yes, we need to do this. And they've enjoyed the benefits since then. So back to you, Monica.
Sorry, I was on mute. It happens all the time. So as I said before,
Okay.
let's start the sustainability and just let me know and I will continue.
Okay.
Go to next.
I don't know if people can see my smiling face or whatever, but that's fine. I see your smiling face. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about sustainability a little bit. This is something that personally I've been campaigning on, I guess since the time I was president in 2016. But, sustainability means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And what I'm going to try to do quickly today is just introduce what sustainability means to us as corrosion professionals. And it's a bit of a buzzword, but let's make sure we understand what it is. So could you put the next slide on? So here's a more proper definition than my non sequitur definition, but anyway, sustainability really is development that will meet the needs of the present today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's making sure that we do things properly today and we're not going to ruin things for the future. That's really what sustainability is about. And you can see that statement came out in 1987. So it's been thought about, but even more and more, whether you want to talk about climate programs and this, that, and the other, this is really more to do with material usage. Okay, the next slide, please. So basically, material sustainability for us as corrosion people is the way that materials are sourced, the way they're processed, the way they're manufactured into products, and maintained through the product life cycle, and hopefully redirected at their end of life to be reused or remanufactured and so on. What you're seeing on the left might be a little bit of a mystery, but basically, if you look closely, you'll notice that this is really an old car tire. And on a trip to Thailand I had a few years ago, these were at the side of the road of everybody's house. And basically somebody very clever just took old tires and put them in, made them into garbage cans, essentially. And every household had one of these. And that rubber will probably last forever. And that's what the garbage man collects every week. So that's a good example of how things, for instance, could be repurposed at the end of their life. Okay, the next slide, please. There's another concept, which is material stewardship. It's very closely related to material sustainability. And there's quite a bit on this slide, but basically material stewardship is more to do with managing the flow of materials into society and thereby improving its sustainability by mitigating environmental, economic, and societal impacts and maximizing the efficiency and durability. So it's being a good steward of how materials are being used. And so there is a few papers that have now been presented on the NASE forum. We've actually had a few symposium by now at major conferences. And Chris Taylor and as co-author have basically come up with a 4D approach. And again, you can read that at your leisure, but it essentially is ways to look after materials better by making them more durable, maybe having less material in a particular component. Obviously thinking about designing materials so that they can be used through multiple life cycles, not just one life cycle and throwing it out. Then finally, are there waste streams that maybe come out of a particular industry plant or an industry that could actually be used as a feed stream to another process? And I'll show you a good example of that here in a second. Okay, go ahead. So as Monica had mentioned, the NASE impact study, which was released in 2016, did a fantastic job of making not only corrosion professionals, but making the management in their organizations aware of the cost of corrosion. And it basically put a lot of what we do into dollars and cents so that we could help them see the merit of having a good corrosion management program. But what we're trying to do, and we did with the cost of corrosion study in Canada, is we also married that with the concept of sustainability. And by asking 10 questions in our survey, we thought, hey, if we're going out to ask them about corrosion management, why don't we tack on a few more questions about sustainability and see how that fits in with things? And that was very interesting. And again, the results are all in this report. But basically, it's going to not only highlight, we're trying not just to highlight the value of a corrosion management program, but also how to look after materials better and obviously be a better steward of those materials. Okay, the next slide. So I want to introduce one more concept. I think a lot of the audience will have already heard of the cradle to cradle as opposed to cradle to whatever. But basically the cradle to cradle concept is the basis of a circular economy. And on the left-hand side of the diagram, you see a biological cycle. This is what Mother Nature, Mother Earth, whichever, does very well. Right from producing something, using something, it biologically degrades, say on the forest floor, it becomes a nutrient, sustains more plants, which then grow and can be produced, for use the trees or whatever. On the right-hand side, we want to try to use those same concepts and ideas in a circular fashion. So when we produce something, there's a heck of a lot of energy that goes into actually making something the first time. So if we have to remake that on and on over and over again, because we have a more of a linear type of economy where we take something, we make it, we use it, and then we throw it out, that's a tremendous loss of energy and all that goes along with that. So there's a lot of clever people around the world these days that are finding ways where we produce something, we use it, then we return it. And of course, the most obvious thing is thinking about recycling. But in some cases, things can be taken apart. So they've been designed in such a way that they can be taken apart at the end of their use. And then they can provide raw materials and raw parts for being remanufactured, for instance. So there's many, many examples if you look up the circular economy. And I think more and more we should be thinking this way when we go about industry. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah. And this is a bit of a busy slide, but this is really what it comes down to. What you see here is a number of different, totally different plants. One, producing, whether they're producing gyprock or whether they're producing energy or biogas or whatever. But what this is showing is that this is really what industrial symbiosis is really all about. It's where you're taking streams that you previously might have dumped out into, I'll say a river or maybe, something like that, or maybe up into the air. And yet that waste stream has certain value to another plant. And so if you were to look at this diagram in more detail, and again, this is referred to in some of our articles, it would show you that the one plant, take an example, found that they were throwing something out, but they found just down the road there was another plant that could use that. So thereby they made some profit from that, and the waste was not created. It was actually used by somebody else. And there's, again, many, many examples. This is one industrial park. I believe it's in Sweden or Norway. Anyway, Scandinavia, let's put it that way. And it shows how with some innovative thinking, we could be using waste streams many times over in other ways. And there's value to that, and it makes things more sustainable. Okay, so the next slide, I think, is, yeah. So finally, I get to, I've just kind of summarized in one slide the 10 questions that we asked different organizations. Again, as Monica had outlined, we wanted to ask them with respect to what they did during the design part of their asset life, operations, maintenance, manufacturing and construction, then operations and maintenance, and finally at retirement, to understand, where there may be some strengths or where there may be some weaknesses or opportunities for improvement. And it clearly showed to us that while we were doing actually pretty well, like up in the 60% range for most areas, it did show that when we started to look at the retirement of assets, we weren't doing the best job of being able to reuse or repurpose or remachine or whatever those particular products and so on. So there's a lot of dollars and cents, and that's why it ties back to kind of the cost of corrosion that are being wasted here. And yet by looking at the full life cycle and looking at sustainable practices, I think industry can do better. So I think that was the last slide, was it? I don't have the guide in front of me. Oh yeah. I'll give it back to you, Monica. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandy. And yeah, this is one of the things that make this particular Canadian study very unique, because it's the first time we are looking at sustainability, and we are really making a push, and we hope this will be like the example. So the next countries that decide to do this kind of a study, they'll look at their sustainability portion as well. So what can we get away from these 30 minutes, or I think we have exceeded our time already a little bit. So what can we get from these 40 minutes that we have been discussing? We have, obviously there is a cost of having unmitigated actions in corrosion. Some of that cost is quantifiable, some of that is unquantifiable. But then we have, with this study, we have a lot of tools. And I know we corrosion people, we get super excited about the MIG and then how this mechanism is acting on this and how this, oh my God, we found a really low spot. But making that transition between that all that technical knowledge and go and present to the managers who don't not understand why we get excited because a little microbe is eating up our steel. They only care about, you know, how much that is going to cost and how much this is going to make me, you know, impact financially my plant. This is going to give you guys, all the technical people, leaders, managers, this is going to give you a really good tool to hopefully go and get those conversations and then transmit how this is important. We do require flexible corrosion management programs. Flexible is the word of the last 2 years, I guess, with all the COVID. So this is not an exception. We need to adapt. We need to get things in the management and in the corrosion management world that integrate and then make a feedback loop. We know for sure that technology, people, science, this is not the limiting part. We have all that. If we implement everything that we know with the tools we have, with the people we have, we can save lots of money. And then basically, bottom line is we need our cultures to become more centered and to make this a really part of the day-to-day. This is not only for the corrosion people or the integrity or reliability. This is something that has to cascade beyond those boundaries. This is something that we do as a team, and we work as a team, even with our contractors. And then we have seen cases where working and implementing and thinking in that way makes sense and then pays off, basically. So with that, I don't have any more slides other than this. How can we help you? What is the goal of this study? What little questions do you have popping right now in your minds? And we have reiterated along the little talk that we have had here, Sandy, myself. This is publicly available. If you don't find it, if you want to discuss more, just come back our way. If you find this very interesting and you want to have, you know, like a talk in your company or within another organization, come back to us. We'll make sure that happens. If you think this will be worth it, going and talk to someone, let us know. And right now it's the time for questions, I guess. So Brett, back to you.
That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate that insight. So for everybody still here, please, if you've got questions for Sandy and Monica, please enter it in through the Q&A chat through your Zoom client, and I'll be sure to ask it. So, I mean, $52 billion, wow. That is an enormous amount, much higher than I think I expected. And I work in an industry that helps manage this, but, so I'm curious, does the study go and does it, break it down by the different sectors? I know most of us would be interested in how does this compare simply for the oil and gas infrastructure?
It does. And I love how competitive we are as engineers, right? How are we better than India? How are we better than Brazil? How are we better than the mining sector in the oil and gas? So all that is in there. There is a lot of details on how the numbers came up about and how we compare not only within Canada between sectors, but how we compare within those sectors globally.
Awesome. So then how does somebody go then and use this data then to help argue, in the case of like, kind of like an example, why should we buy the more expensive material? Why should we do corrosion control up at the front? What's there that people can use to take what's in the report and then argue to their manager of, this is why you need to do this?
There is a really good tool at the end of the study. It's called an ROI, and then it walks you through steps and step by step on things exactly like you're describing. So you can take that information. The idea really is to show what will that mean in terms of dollars. So it gives a lot of insight and a lot of guidance on how to have those hard conversations. And if anything fails, call us. Sandy and myself will be really behind your back saying, yeah, this is important and this is how and why this is important, and you should listen to this.
I think, Brett, the Canadian study is not unique in that, from the aspect that we've included the same economic tools at the back of the study as the original impact study. And there's actually 4 economic models there, like life cycle cost and different ways to look at it. So just like the example I mentioned, if somebody had have actually looked about what it would have cost me, it would have cost me $200,000 to put a gas blanket back in the time of construction on this tank. That would have netted me 17 billion now. So that's what we're trying to highlight with the study. But like Monica says, there's ways that you can look at what that investment will give you as a return. And that's what I think as corrosion engineers, it took me a while to figure this out, but I caught on after a while. But we love to talk about technical solutions. We love to talk about, oh, there's this new type of coating, or there's this new type of material that can be used. But management doesn't really, I won't say they don't care about that. They just aren't in the deep technical details like we are. And so what they want to know at the end of the day is, what's it going to cost me? And what benefit economically am I going to get out of it, let alone the side benefits that I might get from an environmental perspective or a safety perspective and so on, which you can blend in with it. But first and foremost, we need to talk that language of dollars and cents. And when we do that as a corrosion professional, we're going to find a lot of more success in implementing our recommendations. That's my answer.
Really fair. And that's always the, one of the more harder arguments, because as a technical person, when you're trying to, talk about the what if scenarios, right? It's based off of theoretical, company ending scenarios, especially in my case, working on pipelines, of why some of this is important. But, it'd be neat to see, okay, so what has it generally costed other companies who haven't done this kind of thing, and then have that track record of proof data on it to show, well, this is what other companies have spent because they didn't do the right thing, right?
Yeah. And I think what the impact study also, going on to Impact Plus, and we don't have time to go into that today, but Monica, for instance, is taking the training to become an impact navigator. That's what we call them. And that's basically somebody who can sit down with a company and help them understand their corrosion management model as it sits today, through these types of questions, and then help them understand, okay, well, and highlight, well, maybe we could do better, and why we would want to do better. So I think that's really one of the messages we wanted to get across today, is that this study hopefully doesn't just collect dust on the shelf, but hopefully will inspire some companies to say, just like you saw in the city of Vancouver, somebody probably attended the impact talks at the conference that happened to be in Vancouver in 2016 and said, hey, wait a minute, maybe we could be doing something. They did an audit and found that they could do a lot better. Well, what NASE, and now AMPP, has done is actually help facilitate that by training navigators that are very knowledgeable in these types of practices to help the company steer them through that analysis. And you know, sure, go at it by yourself if you want. That's a great first step, but there's help out there, if you will, through AMP.
No, perfect. I appreciate that insight. So so as part of some of the analysis, mainly that MVP analysis that you were showing there, Sandy, you know, I know we've kind of mostly focused on what is the dollar impact on there, but has there been any thought or consideration to looking at potentially the, I guess, wider impacts, such as, you know, environmental or social impacts related to, you know, to the importance of corrosion management? Has that kind of assessment been done or thinking of being done, or what are the challenges of potentially doing something like that?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the NASE cost study done in 2003, when it came up to $276 billion, if you delve into that particular report, what you'll hear is that that's kind of direct costs. And what you're referring to is there's a heck of a lot of indirect costs. Like, for instance, if you had a bridge failure and all of a sudden 500,000 people can't get to their jobs that day, what is the impact of that? And to answer your question fairly quickly, I don't think that type of analysis has been looked at very carefully, and certainly could be, but I think there's enough. If 52 billion doesn't get you thinking a little bit, I know we spend a lot of money these days on other things, but if 52 billion doesn't grab your attention, you know, I think it should. And but fair point. There's a lot of other related costs that would go along with this. That, you know, just the if you did have a rupture, or if you did have, think of those case studies. That's why we wanted to put them into the overall report, is because imagine what those 100,000 people in Calgary had to go through, and the cost of disruption, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a dollar figure to that? Probably, but we haven't hazarded a guess as to what that might be. I think there's just a lot of other impacts.
Let me add something, if I may, here. So unfortunately, when things like this happened, we don't seem to be able to quantify some of the impacts right away. But if you think about the Flint incident, where that whole municipality decided we are not going to treat the water, and then we are just going to run the water from the river. No, and I hope this is not strange for everyone. The Flint incident, you can look at it, even in Google it. And then lots of people got poisoned. And then lots of people right now are living with long life-term illnesses because they were brushing their teeth. They were taking showers. Yeah, probably they were boiling the water for cooking. But all of the other things that a household came into contact with water were done for years with contaminated water. And then those people are now ill, severely ill, and they were kids and adult, like teenagers, and right now they have to live their whole 50 more years of life, or whatever, many years with that. So that's a little bit of unquantifiable, but this is a really good example that a bad decision in a corrosion management system inflicted into public. And people right now are paying jail for decisions like that, and they should. You know, it's a lot of those social impacts can only be looked at after the fact, which is very sad, but it's just reality. And examples have happened, like how many roller coasters had failed and then people got, you know, injured about it. So every industry that touches anything with corrosion has had examples. So there's tons of information outside. And yeah, sure enough, it is very difficult to quantify, but there are big examples of how this socially and humanly impacted some people.
That's very well spoken. I mean, as somebody who works with pipeline risk all the time, right? I find it's very challenging to, you take those considerations on there, but you find it almost impossible to quantify, and then to look at, things like social impact and all that stuff, right? Like, as from the pipeline industry, right? Nobody would have thought that potentially some of the failures that happened a decade ago, well, maybe you can quantify the impact of the lives lost, the infrastructure destroyed, could have made pipelines very difficult to build in these days, because, hey, look, you have these examples of your pipeline failing, and look what it did to the environment, look what it did to the people. And, those are costs that are just, they're, like you said, they're impossible to quantify at the time. And you can only look back and say, boy, I wish we did some corrosion management at that point on there. So we're getting near the end of time here. So maybe I'll just open it up or leave it up for a couple quick questions. One of the questions, so $52 billion, it's a lot of money. How do you predict this cost is going to change within Canada within the decades to come? We kind of expect that number is going to go up, but do you see it slightly going up? Is it going to be exponentially increase? What's your insight on that?
So this is where we need to be engaging with policymakers and people that are writing standards and so on and so forth. Hopefully the cost won't go, or I guess the percentage of GDP, maybe look at it that way. Costs will go up from other aspects like inflation and so on. But if we can get this message, and it's why we're working with IUPAT, the painters and allied trades, or whatever they are, but basically large coating organization. But we need to get the message through to, in our case, the folks in Ottawa, the folks in Edmonton, or for us here in Alberta, for instance, at the regional, at the provincial, and at the federal federal side of things. And if you remember, Brett, when you chaired that conference a few years ago, that's why we had the privilege of, whether you agree with Mayor Nenchi's politics or not, we felt that it was important that we have him give a keynote address. And he's going, okay, what do I say to these guys? They're corrosion engineers. What do corrosion engineers do? It's part of that. Like, it's part of engaging with, I think, the policymakers is so important. And so what Monica and her team have done is basically be able to put some really good numbers together and analysis. Now what we need to do, like you say, that we're in a communication phase. We need people's help in getting this message out. And the more we do that to the policy and decision makers, the better chance we have of, saving some of that money down the road. So I think that's really, do I know if it's going to go up or not? I would hope so, but I'm not going to hazard a guess as to what a particular government will do. I think we can all individually, though, try to spread that message.
Anthony, where's your crystal ball there?
It's kind of cloudy right now.
No, that's fair enough. And maybe, sorry, Monica, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think my hopes is that we are not going to sit here in 10 years after now and say, oh, shoot, I remember that Monica girl was talking about that. so many, and then that we had a very big jump, 20% from the 2009 study, and now we are at 40% more. So I can really only hope, but I know that if you are sitting down here today, it's because you wanted to hear this. And I hope that this resonates and this helps you get tools to get the message across. And really is like what I can do as an individual to push this. How can I help? And right now that we are in the communication phases, starting those conversations. share social media, ask me for lunch and learn. Whatever you think it's going to help this communication phase is going to be a huge impact, and that you can do that on your own. You don't need your vice president approval.
Yeah, and if I can put in, sorry, I'm going to open up the chapter on sustainability again, Brett. Don't forget there's many committees still active within NASE, AMPP, they're still sorting out the structures a little bit, but I did get an email just the other day that there's a fellow that's taken up the charge on a technical exchange group on sustainability. So, you know, that's a great way to bring people together at conferences and so on. But I think really the most important thing is getting the message out to the policy and decision makers. That's a link that we need to do more of, I believe, and not just stay within our technical bubble, but get out and talk to the politicians.
No, really appreciate that. So we're a little bit past time on here. Maybe just one more mention for the audience. Where can people download this paper again and this information if they want to be able to find it?
In the AMPP website, there is a link in there. Perhaps I can shoot you the link and then you can look at it. But if you just Google it, you will find that in the AMPP. There is as I mentioned before, the materials performance magazine. It has a link to it as well. And if everything fails, contact me and I will send you a copy.
Perfect. And I think we're going to be posting that up on the NASE Calgary website too within due time.
It is already.
If it's not there already.
It is already.
It's already there?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go. Something I clearly didn't notice every time I navigate to that site. So thanks for that insight. All right. So thank you both so much for joining me today. You know, this is a fantastic talk. Probably not as technical as we typically get on here, but really, really important from the, you know, of the importance of corrosion management and why we all do what we do every day and why we continue fighting the fight that we do in our jobs on a regular basis. So I really appreciate you two joining us today and providing our insights on that. To the rest of the audience, it's still on here. You know, thank you again for joining me today. We have a great lineup of new webinars that are going to come in after the new year. So if you haven't already, please make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and stay updated when those get posted on there. And then you can be first to be able to register on there. So without that, I hope everybody has a very relaxing and a safe holiday season, and we'll see everybody again in the new year. And thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.